Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome along to the first edition of What the Israeli Papers Say in 2021 here at Real Israel. There was so much to talk about as ever in Israel in 2020, but you just get the feeling that 2021 could prove to be even more interesting, shall we put it that way. Well, as always, if you're joining us for the first time, please press the subscribe button just below the YouTube channel image here, and then you'll be able to follow all our discussions throughout the course of the year. But I'm delighted that we start the year on a high because we have two very special guests. The first is Professor Eytan Gilboa, who is an expert on US-Israel relations at Bar Ilan University and a senior research associate at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. He's also the author of the recently published The American Public and Israel in the 21st Century. So, Professor Eytan Gilboa, thanks very much for joining us for the first time.
My pleasure, Paul.
Lovely to see you here, and also to welcome back Rami Lador. Rami, a former executive vice president of Bank Hapoalim Southeast Asia division. He also spent some years representing Bank Hapoalim in the United States. He's now retired, but he's very active in the citizens' campaign against corruption in public life in Israel. Rami, very good to see you once again.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we've got so much really to talk about, but we are recording this program the day after the impeachment for the second time of President Donald Trump. So how convenient that we have an expert on American affairs and Israel's relationship to America in Eytan Gilboa. So I'll come to you first, Eytan, before we discuss the Israel side of things, just for your view of the impeachment, whether you thought it was a wise move or a rash move on the part of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, we can recall the first time President Trump was impeached back a year ago in December 2019. I thought there was no justification for impeachment at that time. I think this time there is a valid reason for taking this extreme measure against him. A week ago, he really incited to violence. If you attack the building of the Congress, you also violate the Constitution of the United States. So I think the impeachment this time is much more justified. However, what we see today is very unusual situation because Trump is about to conclude his term, first and last term, in about a week. So there would be no time to complete the process. The House of Representatives did pass the impeachment resolution, but this is only half of the process. It has to be completed by a trial in the Senate. We would recall that in 2019, the House, which was then, as it is today, ruled by the Democrats, went to the Senate, and the Senate did not convict the president.
Yes.
This time, there's only the House resolution, and there's no time to go to the Senate. So the completion of the process, if it were to be applied, will have to begin after the departure of President Trump from the White House, and then we have a combination of complicated both judicial, constitutional, and political maneuvering around it. The Democrats would like to complete the process for three reasons. One, as a warning to any future president who would behave like Trump. The second reason is to prevent Trump from participating, from seeking the presidency in 2024. And the third reason, which I think is very interesting, is perhaps to break up the Republican Party. in the Republican Party, we see much debate about impeachment. There are Republicans who think that Trump should be impeached. 10 of them joined the Democrats the other day and supported the impeachment resolution. But many others disagree. Those who are strong supporters of Trump, and therefore the trial could really divide the Republican Party even more. And so these are the three reasons the Democrats would like to go ahead. Yet there are
a strategic decision, really, as much as anything, on the part of the Democratic Party. Just before I let you go on, I just want to come to Rami for one moment. Rami, did you approve of the decision to impeach President Trump? Of course, it does impact so much on our relationship with America. It's such a close relationship. What goes on there is so important. Do you think maybe it might have been better not to impeach him and allow him to continue to run riot in the Republican Party and divide them that way, rather than the way that Eytan has suggested?
I think that the impeachment himself was very necessary, and I think the lawmakers, the members of Congress, could not have faced the mirror if they did not go through the impeachment process. I would be very curious how the Republicans who did not support the impeachment, how they will continue to act according to their oath. I saw or I heard that Ted Cruz actually resigned, which I think was the honorable thing to do. Ted Cruz from Texas, of course. And he did. We saw in real time the speech he made while the Congress was ratifying the electoral votes. And it was inciting people, go do whatever you need to do and don't bother me with the details. And I think the President of the United States, with all due respect, should not have the ability to do that without being impeached. Regarding the impeachment himself, it's frustrating that even with this, all the cause to impeach him, it cannot be done within clause, I think, 14 of 4 of the 25th Amendment, because I think Vice President Pence should have taken the opportunity to declare what's right is right after 4 years of following blindly President Trump's reliance on what some might call fake news, others might call the created news.
Yeah, well, moving on from that, because of course Israel's relationship with America is central to the way things go here, and we're welcoming a new president very shortly in Joe Biden. Eytan Gilboa, you wrote a very interesting paper for the Begin Sadat organization, which was written just after Joe Biden had won the election. There were some interesting points that you made there. You made one point in particular that I thought was interesting for viewers, in that, of course, he was vice president for Barack Obama, but you're expecting him to tread a slightly different path to Barack Obama now that he is in control and at the steering wheel. How do you think the relationship's going to develop with Bibi Netanyahu, in particular because of the closeness that Netanyahu had to Trump previously?
I don't think that Biden's first term is going to be Obama's third term. Every president wants to have his own imprint on history, and therefore things have changed in the United States, in the world, in the Middle East. So I do not expect the policies of the Obama years to dominate the agenda of President Biden. There are certain things that are going to change, certain things that are not going to change, and other things that we don't know yet, and I don't think Biden himself knows how to develop. What I think will not change is the need for Biden to concentrate on domestic affairs. He has to cope with very serious economic and health crisis in the United States. This is going to be his major test because of the negligence Trump exhibited in dealing with the coronavirus crisis. Secondly, he said he would like to heal the polarization in the United States. This is also a major task. In terms of Israel, then he will continue the tendency, which I believe had started already with Obama and continued with Trump, and that is a disengagement from world affairs. Obama said it clearly. The United States does not want to serve as anymore as the world policeman. And Trump continued with that direction. Given the need to concentrate on domestic affairs, I believe that Biden will continue that trend. This is not so good for Israel because Israel is strong when the United States is strong, and weak when the United States is weak. If the United States is moving toward isolation, splendid isolation, not the kind of isolation that existed between the two world wars, but it's always relative, and so disengagement will not be so good for Israel. And the other thing that obviously will continue is the very close strategic cooperation between the United States and Israel, even during the fierce disagreements between Israel and the Obama administration. Those very close relationships were not damaged in any way. And the main reason for this is the mutual benefits both countries receive from this close strategic relationship in intelligence, in improving and producing sophisticated weapons, in exchanging of views about doctrines. Israel and the United States are facing very similar strategic threats, and therefore they have to, and they will continue to very closely cooperate on measures to confront those threats.
Well, just to come back on a couple of points there, very interesting analysis. I just wonder what your view is, Eytan Gilboa, of the fact that Israel has been so closely tied to Donald Trump and his policies, one of the few countries, democratic countries in the world that has really followed where Donald Trump has led. And given the fact that he's ending his presidency in ignominy, really in disgrace, and that many people have seen him as a distasteful, dishonest person, has it overall on the world stage been detrimental to Israel's position, leaving aside whatever benefits Israel may have received in the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital and one or two other things? Have we been led up a very dark alley by Donald Trump?
No, this is an issue that will discontinue. Biden and Netanyahu, and we have to remember that Netanyahu will go to elections here in Israel in a few months, on March 23rd. It is not certain whether or not he will continue to serve as a prime minister. So regardless, I believe that the intimate, very close relationship that Trump established with Israel is an aberration in American-Israeli relations. It's like one in a lifetime scenario. This is not going to repeat itself. However, I do not expect Biden to take a revenge against Netanyahu or any other Israeli prime minister on the challenges, and there were very serious challenges to the Democrats back during the Obama years. Netanyahu went to Congress in 2015 to challenge the president, and he supported Republican candidates to president. and by doing so, he really created a rift between Israel and the Democrats, as well as between Israel and American Jews, because American Jews, like 70% of them, support Democrats, and therefore there could be, especially among those who are going to serve in the Biden administration and come from the ranks of the Obama administration. There are a few,
such as Susan Rice.
No, Susan Rice is not there, but I think that that there are a number of people like Anthony Blinken, who is going to be Secretary of State. His deputy is Wendy Sherman, who negotiated this controversial deal between the United States and Iran. We can talk about that a little bit later. And we have Jack Sullivan, National Security Advisor, who negotiated secretly with Iran back in 2013, negotiations which eventually led to the nuclear deal. So these people might be less enthusiastic about American-Israeli relations, and there could be some serious disagreements about policy issues that we can talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, and Rami, your view of the fact of the last 4 years, just looking back at how closely we have been tied to Trump, and how many people in Israel have genuinely been pleased at the association with Trump's administration. Do you feel that when we look back at this historically, it will be seen as having, in the greater picture, been beneficial to Israel or counterproductive as with the worldview of what people think of Israel?
In this point in time, I think it's very difficult to assess from a historical point of view what the 4 years of Trump presidency has done to Israel, especially vis-a-vis its relations with the Palestinians and with the Arab world. I think what we're facing now with Biden is more of going back to some getting farther away from evangelistic ideas about Israel and its purpose in the world. That is, you have the progressive Democrats who are definitely going to push within the Democratic Party, Biden and Harris, to get closer to the Palestinians, Palestinian rights, human rights. These are issues that we sort of didn't have to deal with during the Trump administration. And I would say that they're going to come up now. The settlement and the entire Palestinian-Israeli conflict is going to have to come to some sort of a pattern of a solution that is being drawn at the end of it. The total avoidance of the Palestinian issue was maybe very comfortable for the Netanyahu governments during the last 4 years, but it will not last the way I suspect in the Biden years. As far as Iran is concerned, I think Biden is also going to lift the sanctions in what is compliance for compliance. You comply with dictated rules of advancing your nuclear program, and we will ease off on the sanctions. I think that's very, very important because we're going in a way back to what in Israel we thought was not a good agreement for Israel. However, apparently that's what's going to happen, and Iran is going to go back to the Obama agreement.
And Iran in recent days has been very active on a number of different fronts. We saw they hijacked the South Korean tanker, and they're wanting funds released, and probably feeling that the Biden administration might not be as intransigent as the Trump one. Do you feel, Eytan Gilboa, that the situation with Iran is something Israel should be very concerned about, or do you feel that Joe Biden will find a way to manage things that keep the lid on any possible conflict here in the region?
Yes, the way to deal with the Iranian nuclear weapons program has been very complicated and challenging. I think that Obama's policy failed, but I also think that Trump's policy failed. Trump canceled all the sanctions, canceled the agreement, imposed harsher sanctions. He thought that Iran will be forthcoming and negotiate a new deal with him. This did not happen. So I believe that Biden and his top foreign policy officials will first and foremost try to prove that that Obama was right and Trump was wrong. Now, Iran has first of all, Iran made two major preconditions for resumption of negotiations with the United States. Condition number one, removal of the sanctions that Trump imposed on them. And number two, return to the 2015 nuclear deal as is, no changes. They also said that they will not be prepared to discuss issues left out from the original agreement, such as the development and experimentation with long-distance ballistic missiles. This is an issue that not only Israel and the Sunni Arab countries are concerned about, but also Europe. And so these are the preconditions. It's going to be very difficult to accept them. Trump said that Biden said he wants to negotiate a new deal, and there are two reasons for that. One, this deal is scheduled to expire just in 5 years, and there is the sunset clause, which says that after it expires, Iran would be allowed to pursue whatever nuclear policies they want. And number two, the reasons that I mentioned earlier, issues that were left out. Now, Israel obviously is concerned about that. I can say that the Iranians are very good negotiators, much better than the United States. If you have only to recall rich Iranian culture, and if you just look at the bazaar in Tehran, you would easily understand that they are much more sophisticated in negotiations, especially with the West. Those events that you have mentioned earlier, such as statements, very extreme statements, and some actions on the ground, I think should be placed within a psychological warfare or psychological battle toward the United States and Europe, as if Iran is going to be tough in those negotiations and would not easily give up on positions. Also, we have to remember that in June, Iran will go to presidential elections. And this is going to be a battle between the tougher guys and the softer guys. There's one candidate who was a prominent figure in the Republican Guards, very tough guy. And I don't expect much to happen during the time between now and, say, June. On the contrary, I expect very tough statements and perhaps even actions to as a message to both the United States and Europe about Iranians' intention. Just the other day, the Republican Guard said, we don't need to go even back to the 2015 nuclear deal. We will do whatever we think is in our national interest, and we will go ahead with our plan to enrich uranium to 20%, which would bring them very close to the production of nuclear weapons. And but while during the Obama years, there was very weak collaboration between the United States and Israel on Iran. And the reason for that was not Netanyahu. The reason for that was Obama. He excluded Netanyahu from the process. I believe that now Netanyahu or anybody else should make an effort to participate in the negotiations. And I also want to say that unlike the Palestinian issue, Iran has a policy toward Iran is very strongly supported in Israel. There's a consensus in Israel that Iran wants to build nuclear weapons, that it is very dangerous to Israel, the Middle East, and even the world, and that effective means have to be adopted to deal with this threat. So the debate between Israel and the United States, and maybe even Europe, on the Iran issue is not on the goal. The goal is to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. The debate is about means. Which means would be the most effective to accomplish that goal? So it depends on how Biden is going to approach this issue, but it could become a source for disagreement and even perhaps confrontation between Israel and the United States, and also the Arab Sunni countries, especially the newly established strategic alliance, because not only Israel, all of the Arab Sunni countries, except for Syria, are subscribing to the same position of Israel and to this very, very concern about Iranian threats and aggression in the region.
Yeah, it's fascinating analysis. It's great to have you with us to have this insight into this subject, which is so complicated, and as well for people looking in from outside, these very important points are very often not highlighted enough in the mainstream media, and you've made some very interesting points. I just want to move on because we've got a number of subjects to look at, and while Israel's relationship with Donald Trump and the US has been a source of some disagreement or embarrassment in some quarters, the one thing that Israel seems to have got right, even though things aren't, everything in the garden is not rosy, but we seem to be leading the world at the moment in the number of people that are being vaccinated against the coronavirus, which of course is a situation impacting every government on the planet. Rami Lador, I want to come to you because we're going to see a couple of articles coming up on screen that have been covering recent developments. The Calcalist website had a very interesting article. Also, Davar, the website of the Histadrut, as well as Ynet, Yediot Achronot's online arm. And here in Israel, we seem to be vaccinating at a faster rate than anywhere else, Rami. Is that something that is down to the good work of the Prime Minister, or is it down to other factors such as the intentions and the hopes of the different medical companies that are supplying the vaccines?
You started the sentence in a very appropriate way. Is it the good work of? And then you added the Prime Minister, and there you lost me, because I think it's despite the Prime Minister, because he's running to the media and making a public case of every single thing that happens good in the country with the I did this and I caused that. I don't think it helped it so much. In fact, it might have hurt it, because the entire world is fighting to get the vaccination allotment, and I think Netanyahu bragging and going to the millionth vaccine, what do you call it? The guy who got the vaccination. 2 million, and it turns out that the count is not even that. The process is done very, very well in Israel, and that is the point that we all need to be very happy with. However, it's for a number of good reasons. The first one is Israel's HMOs, the Israeli Kupat Cholim and the Maccabi. All those medical alliances have been around forever and ever, and they've been digitized for the past 25 years or so, meaning that for a company like Pfizer or Moderna, they have a system that can manage the project of what's the word?
Vaccinating
the entire population and having good statistics for the records to see how the vaccination is going, because everything is digitized throughout the country. The actual vaccination is done in a perfect way by a member of Kupat Cholim Maccabi. You go there, they give you an exact minute when your appointment is. You come to a stadium near Haifa. In that minute, you actually go through the line, no wait. The only wait is after, when they tell you 15 minutes, you have to wait before you continue to drive back home. And they even gave me a piece of chocolate just to sweeten the experience, which was very nice. Israel is a limited country as far as its population. You can, Pfizer and Moderna can use Israel as a great experience to see if you can vaccinate the entire population. We're only 9 million people. Add to that the fact that we have only one point of entry and exit from the country through Ben Gurion Airport. That means they can control who comes in and who comes out. Before, I doubted Netanyahu's role in this. Netanyahu politically was not able to tell passengers from the United States at the beginning and later from other countries who can come and not come. And he could not limit the entry because, I suspect, of political reasons of not being able to make the right decision. Just like right now, when they're doing the zones, they could not enforce the zoning within the Haredi community and the Arab communities. So what do? They lock down the whole country, and this is something that the government is not doing right. But going back to the things that are doing right, so far, another thing which is very unlikely to Israelis are very cynical, but Israelis have taken the attitude that the vaccinations are okay, they trust the vaccinations, and they go by numbers which are more than anybody expected to go and get vaccinated. And that is helping the entire process. And one other thing is that I'm going back to Moderna and Pfizer, is that apparently there are 30-year confidentiality clauses that sort of allow the government and Pfizer and Moderna to have agreements which we, in 30 years, I won't be here, but 30 years can only find out what the real small letters of the agreements are, how much information they're getting, how deep they're getting into our own privacy. We just won't know for 30 years because that's part of the agreement with them. But all in all, I want to say it's a good feeling to be an Israeli and to know we're number one in the world. And we're now counting the days because after the second vaccination, 8 days after that, we understand we can go and hug our grandchildren. And that is something we've been waiting for ever since.
Yeah, there were some very interesting points there, Rami, especially about the way the information is being used going forward in that 30-year period. To Eytan Gilboa, Pfizer, probably as much as anything, were more than happy to oblige Israel by providing the vaccinations, because we essentially are being used as a laboratory project for them to prove the efficacy of their drug. Are you happy being one of those people that is whose body is being used in some respects in order to prove the efficacy for the rest of the world?
Yes, why not? I agree with Rami about certain things, but I think Netanyahu played a role in obtaining those doses of vaccination earlier than anybody believed. He was the last to sign an agreement with Pfizer, but he is the first to get millions of doses compared to other countries. And I think his ability to communicate to people and his arguments, I think help to do that. I think he poorly managed the whole process because, and I agree here, because of all kinds of irrelevant personal and political considerations. But I think the vaccination part, he is managing relatively well. And I think that there were worries here, as much as they still are in many countries, about the vaccine. Many people in other countries, I saw some polls in France, for example, France, like, I don't know, 65% think that the vaccine may harm them. And people say, oh, how so fast that vaccine has been developed. It has not been sufficiently validated. This is not the case in Israel. Although there were concerns here that the public may be suspicious about the vaccine, and there were concerns here especially about two groups, the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs. And I would say that after Israel began vaccination, the aversion to the vaccination was pretty evident in the Arab community. It has changed because they have viewed the rush for vaccination in the Jewish community. There is still some problem with the ultra-Orthodox community, but overall, this was a big surprise that millions of people are wishing and willing, and they try to cut corners in order to get in line and to get the vaccination. And I think Pfizer as well as Moderna, Moderna was supposed to supply Israel, I think, only in February, late February, something like that. And now, first of all, they want to compete with Pfizer to show that they are not less effective. And so what we see here is not only changes in the timetable, we see competition between at least Moderna and Pfizer. And I think, yes, they see in Israel as a model. They also were have been impressed by the very high rate of vaccination here. We passed, as we talk, I think we passed the 2 million people vaccinated already. In about a week, I think we will have 1 million with the second shot. So both these companies, I think they wanted from Israel, in return for the earlier supplies, to provide information about, number one, how you do that, how you are able to vaccinate so many people at such a short time. What is your secret? And I know that some other countries, leaders of other countries, are doing the same thing. They ask our leaders, how you do that? We would like to do it as well. Well, it's not going to be easy because Rami was right. The infrastructure of HMOs, I think, enabled that rapid and wide-scale vaccination. And the second thing is we want to know how vaccination works. So we have, as you may know, top medical researchers, like top medical researchers in the world, including on pandemics. And so the companies, Pfizer as well as Moderna and maybe others, they want to know how effective are the vaccinations vis-a-vis different sections of people, older people,
Absolutely.
younger people, etc. So Israel indeed is becoming a laboratory, and if by March, as many predicted, 80%, 90% of the population is going to be vaccinated, this indeed can help the world, the other countries, to know better how to faster and more effectively vaccinate their own population.
Oh, I agree 100% on that. Yes, Rami, come back. Yeah.
I'd like to add a point, and because we are facing an election in Israel in March, I think a lot of the issue around the vaccination is Bibi Netanyahu's role in it. And I must add that both Pfizer and Moderna are publicly traded companies. They have to report to the board of directors and to their shareholders. I cannot see in their annual statement them saying, well, we like Prime Minister Netanyahu, and besides that, the president of Pfizer is Jewish. Those are not related issues to a decision a public corporation is able to make. I think Netanyahu is using the situation where Israel has the right infrastructure to his advantage. And sure, he may have talked 18 times to the president of Pfizer, but I cannot imagine a situation where the president of Pfizer will not accept a call from the prime minister of Israel. So Netanyahu's ability to campaign and to leverage any good news to his ability, especially with the elections coming up. Listen, we're doing good. I say despite Netanyahu, because he has to put himself in front of every good flag that you want to wave here.
Paul, may I add something?
Yes, briefly.
Yeah. So I think that, yes, I think the elections here are accelerating the vaccination campaign. But Rami, you know much more about boards of all kinds of companies. But we were told that Israel is paying twice as much for a single dose than, say, in the United States or Europe, or maybe 4 times or maybe 3 times more. So if I were
$75 a dose.
Yeah,
Eytan, that's a very good point. Eytan, that's a good point.
Yeah, if you were the director of say Pfizer, and you tell your board, look, yes, we had to change some timetables, but I'm getting twice as much money for a single dose, I don't think they would disagree with this.
That's a good point that actually strengthened my idea that Pfizer and Moderna did the best thing for their companies. By the way, I tried to argue with some people about how clumsy Netanyahu actually is, and I said we paid double what they paid in Europe. And there I got an answer which I don't argue with. People said, who cares what we pay as long as we get it first? And I tend to accept that, even though it doesn't add to my disagreements with the Netanyahu regime.
Well, it's a very good point that the cost. When I saw that we were paying $75 a shot, I thought, well, that's a bit pricey, you know. But obviously, we're paying a premium in order to get it first, and at the same time, we're doing Pfizer and Moderna a favor, but we're also doing our people a favor, I believe, by the getting the vaccination so quickly. Indeed, I've spoken to a couple of people in Britain in the last 24 hours. One who told me he's expecting his first vaccination to be probably in August, and the second who said it would be midsummer, around my age, mid-50s, not getting until midsummer, even though Britain's average fatality at the moment from the latest strain of the coronavirus is only 58. So a lot of people are being left in many countries. I'm sure people watching this from around the world will be envious for once of the way things are working in Israel on this particular subject. And regardless of the politics behind it, I think the protection of the health of the public, and that's both the Jewish, the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi, the Christian public, they're all being catered for. And I think for once we seem to have got something just about right. But we're going to move on because we've been looking in quite some detail at these issues. And I want to just go back to the Trump issue in a way, because really it is soon we won't have to talk about him too much, I hope, in the next month or two, although you never know. But I just want to ask you, Eytan Gilboa.
Because if he is going to face a trial in the Senate, you will have to talk a lot about him.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I just wanted to ask you for just a brief overview of the way people in Israel have viewed Trump. The fact, for example, and we'll see this on a few of the newspaper pieces we're showing, these are a couple from the Jerusalem Post in recent days, that they're still going ahead with naming a new little town after him, Trump Heights or something like that. I personally, I might probably call it Trump Depths, but that's another story. And then, of course, the fact that so many Jewish people in the United States on the ultra-Orthodox or the religious side seem to still support Trump, despite a rather patchy record he has on anti-Semitism and some of the things he's said and the organizations he's refused to denounce. What do you think the Jewish and indeed the Israeli view of Trump has been, and how divided are we in that perspective of the soon-to-be former president?
Okay, it depends on issues, but I believe that both in the United States and Israel, the division is determined by political ideologies. So, if I recall correctly, I think Gallup or Pew Research conducted global polls, about attitudes to Trump. Israel was the only country where about 60% of the people like Trump and supported him. In all of the other countries, Trump received very low marks. And I think the attitude toward Trump, although some of his actions, I believe you can locate in the consensus here, like the transfer of the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem should have been done decades ago. This was a correction of a historical anomaly. I've written about it, a big paper. I think that even his recognition of Israel's sovereignty in the Golan Heights, given what is happening in Syria, I think many people, I think there's a consensus here that the Golan Heights will never be returned. And there was more debate about his peace plan, although in this plan, he offered the establishment of a Palestinian state over 70% of the territory. But those on the left here didn't like him much because of his close association with Netanyahu, and obviously the right in Israel liked him because of that. In the United States, exactly the opposite. Since most Jews are liberal and support the Democratic Party, they became even more irritated from Netanyahu because of that close relationship with Trump, which they despised. So, and you were quite right. In the last elections, the presidential elections, 70% of American Jews voted for Trump. 30% did not. They voted for 70% for Biden, and only 30% for Trump. And of those 30%, the Orthodox Jews, I think, played a major role, but also American Israelis. Those from Israel who immigrated to the United States, they also a little bit to the right, and they voted for Trump. So I think that this is another dividing issue inside both Jewish communities in the United States and Israel, and also overall between Israel and the United States.
Yeah, and Rami, just a view on this with regard to Trump and the way particularly the religious Jewish vote in America still supporting him, and indeed one of the main New York Orthodox Jewish papers still coming out saying that he's been very badly done to in this whole impeachment process.
I understand why Israelis are satisfied with Trump's recognition of the Golan Heights, and that's why they formed a town which didn't really take place yet, called Trump Town or Trump Heights.
Trump Heights, I think, in English. Yeah.
Trump Heights. I understand I understand why many Israelis are very satisfied with the embassy of the United States finally moving into our capital, Jerusalem. However, I think that when things are done without the cooperation of almost 50% of the inhabitants of the people between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, that is the Palestinians, and I think it upset them. It didn't bring us in a closer relation with them. I think it was done in the wrong way. I think it was done in the wrong way because they didn't settle anything. We didn't mention it before, but I believe that Biden will open the American consulate in East Jerusalem, which will be a consulate to serve the people of the West Bank. That's my belief. He's going to do that. I think he's going to renew funds to the Palestinian Authority in a way that President Trump stopped it. So I think the Biden administration will view the Israeli-Palestinian issue more as a whole situation that needs to be one day solved, so we'll have a little peace in this area. And that is not going to be solved by having embassies in the Emirates where we had actually economic relations and no war for years. And I think that we as Israelis should really avoid taking sides within the American Democrat, Republican. We should be entirely bipartisan. It doesn't do us any good to support one side over the other. We have to continue to support, and that's what one of Israel's biggest and most important strategic assets, the support of the American community to Israel. And if you take a risk like Netanyahu did, to the point where Obama didn't even see him when he came to one of the visits in Washington, we're risking, the American support. We really are risking it, not to mention that we are upsetting, you asked about Orthodox, but most of the American Jews are not Orthodox. Most of them are reforms. Most of them do not even identify themselves with real religion, but they still recognize themselves or they describe themselves as Jews. And we as Israel cannot afford to lose them because of the right-wing philosophies that sort of guide the present regime in Israel.
Well, I'm going to move things on because the final point I'm going to come to, and it's a very nicely linking through to it from Rami there, is actually just looking at what might be in store in brief for Israel and Palestine and the negotiations that could take place in 2021 under the auspices of the Biden administration. I want to ask Eytan Gilboa, regardless of who is prime minister in Israel after the March elections, is there anybody serious on the Palestinian side that we can actually talk to, have a proper conversation with, and come to sort of an understanding that isn't going to be playing internal Palestinian politics and has the interests of the Palestinian people as a whole more at heart in any negotiations that might come along with Israel?
My view is that the Palestinians are not serious about themselves. And therefore, you cannot really advance anything if you are not interested in promoting a peace agreement. This is a long story, which I don't have now time to discuss. I believe, though, that the normalization agreements that Israel signed with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco represent, to me, a game changer vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue. Because for decades, the Palestinians vetoed any option for reconciliation between Israel and the Arab world. The assumption, the Palestinian assumption, which has been a wrong assumption, that Israeli-Palestinian peace can come only after Israel concludes a peace with the Arab countries. Then it has been for the second time proven invalid. The Israeli-Egyptian peace agreement back in 1978-79 showed that Egypt ignored the Palestinians. Egypt decided that it is in its own best interest to sign a peace agreement with Israel and forget about the Palestinians. The normalization agreements now, I think, should be seen by the Palestinians as well as perhaps by the Biden administration as an opportunity to do something. However, I do not think that Biden is going to completely change American policy toward the Palestinian issue. Yes, he will not transfer the embassy back to Tel Aviv. He will open that consulate in Eastern Jerusalem and maybe the PLO office in Washington, which Trump closed. He may restore funds for the Palestinian Authority. This is a big story in itself because the funds are not used for the purposes they are being donated. But I do not see him, especially in view of the domestic priorities and the past failures of American mediation efforts, to come up with a major new initiative to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I have written and said many times in the past, the United States and Europe can do so much. The sides themselves have to decide that they want genuine conflict resolution and peace. There were Israeli governments who were interested in this. Unfortunately, the Palestinians were not. And right now, obviously, the two countries, the leadership of the two countries are not keen in negotiating a final peace agreement.
And Rami, the last word on this, because we're just about out of time. Do you see anybody on the Palestinian side that's seriously going to reach out to try and find a way of making progress with Israel, or are we going to be in the same sort of stalemate that we've been for so long, despite the new administration?
I'll be brief. I'll just say that I don't see anyone on the Palestinian side or the Israeli side that are willing to do what it takes to have normalization. And even the word occupation, half of Israel would say is a word you shouldn't use. And from the Palestinian side, the word occupation is like the holiest idea that they have to eliminate. And I think we're not ready. And as a consequence, I hate to see what the occupation is doing for us, for our morality, for the nationality law from our side, and for them that they just do not have the leader that will take the courageous step forward like President Sadat and Menachem Begin did against all expectations in 1978.
That's right. That's right. Over 40 years ago, they certainly have struggled to find anybody that would represent them. I think, honestly, in negotiation with Israel, but also on our side, there hasn't always, in particular over the last decade, been the will to look for a genuine compromise, I feel. But this will all pan out over the course of 2021. I hope very much, Eytan Gilboa, you'll rejoin us later on in the year, and we'll be able to revisit these subjects and maybe go into some of the points in a little bit more detail that we weren't able to visit today. But thank you very much for joining us, Eytan. Really good to have you with us. And Rami Lador, as always, thanks a lot for your contribution and your insight into these different issues. And to you for watching, thanks very much for being with us at What the Israeli Papers Say, our first show, hopefully of many, in 2021 here at Real Israel. My name is Paul Alster. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye for now.